All right. Looks like we are live. Okay. Nice. Hey, everyone. Um, Happy Sunday. Welcome, welcome. And thank you for joining me in the session. Let me just double check my feed here. I'm a little bit, just want to make sure it's still working. Okay. I'm honored to be here with you in this time of sensitivity and uncertainty. And I look forward to sharing time with you in our shared sacred space together today. So the things we'll do in our time together in sacred space today, as always, is we will start by setting sacred space, and then we will talk about our topic for the week. And our topic for the week this week will be the difference between healing and curing. The difference between healing and curing, just a topic that is near and dear to my heart. So we'll talk about that. We'll have a bit of an exercise at the end, and then we'll close sacred space. So in opening sacred space, I will first say that what we would like to do here in terms of a goal or intention is that we would like to create a space, make a space that is devoid of fear, threat, and control in order for us to open to higher guidance, but from within our own selves. And that could come in the form of intuition, random flashes of insight and brilliance, a muse that kind of inspires you along the way. However, it kind of takes you, however you experience it. But mainly it comes from within your own inner self. A safe sanctuary space for us all to be able to relax and surrender, let our guard down with no fear of any danger or threat, so that we can partake of the emotional nourishment and the spiritual nourishment that you can basically only get from being in sacred space, and in this case, being in sacred space together as a group. And in opening sacred space today, I will propose, as I do every week, that we all follow the 4 principles of proceeding in sacred space. Number 1 is confidentiality. Standard Vegas rules: what happens in sacred space stays in sacred space. Now that's the rule for when we're in person. When we're online, we the feed is public, the replay will be public. So the way we handle confidentiality is via anonymization. And the way we do that is that you would come and into the Crowdcast feed, go into your edit profile, and then just change your username to Mickey Mouse, Harry Potter, what have you, and then come back in and chat and ask questions as before, only if you want. The second principle is that there is no threat or controlling, no fixing, no tough love. So in other words, no controlling or intervening, even if the intention is positive, right, or well-meaning. And the reason for that is our intention here is to hold space for each other, to be however we are, right, without any intention or threat or risk of fear, threat, and control. And when you intervene for someone, for someone's own good, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But because it involves the levers of control and even threat, right? You better take this medicine or else even worse things are going to happen, right? That's a threat. A well-meaning threat, but still a threat. That automatically puts you back in profane space. And again, as we always say, there's nothing wrong with the profane. Profane isn't bad. It's just a different kind of flavor profile. And if we want to stay in the sacred, we kind of refrain from any kind of threat, controlling, fixing, even tough love. And we hold space for each other to be however we actually find ourselves. So I could be afraid. I could be anxious. I could be happy and relaxed. And then on top of that, I could be stressed out and feeling incompetent that I'm afraid or anxious, or feeling incompetent that I'm actually happy and relaxed. Or I could be feeling pretty good, feeling pretty justified that I am afraid or anxious or happy or relaxed. And the point is, however you find yourself, we hold space for you to be that way and without any threat of intervention or trying to change you or fix you. The third principle is that there is no commerce, right? So as a corollary to the first 2 points, we're not here to control or threaten each other. So we don't sell each other anything. So I can't sell you anything. Gowrie can't sell you anything. Please don't sell things to each other in the chat or in the questions. And that also includes recommendations as well. So, there's a great book that covers this topic, or you should look into sort of this speaker or this kind of method of therapy or whatever. We ask that you refrain from that in sacred space, precisely because we are here for your energy, not for the things you bring. In other words, we are here for what you are, not for what you do or provide. And if you say, well, I'm just going to slip this little recommendation in because I mean well, right? That is still sort of kind of taking a bit of control. And what that does is that sort of sets the example for other people. And then they're looking at what you did. They're like, well, I'm not going to do that. Or they might say, I want to do that. In either case, it takes basically the sort of focus off of that feeling of being devoid of fear, threat, and control. An interesting side point is that when you practice that yourself, when you are biting your tongue, you are exerting effort, right? And the point is that it does take effort to maintain sacred space. It does take muscles, just like in meditation when we say, when you're meditating, you're not doing nothing, right? If you're clenched tight and you do nothing, that's this. When you meditate, you're actually flexing a different set of muscles to open up your mind, to open up your being, and actually flex the stretch in the other direction. So no commerce, no recommendations. And then the fourth principle is that there is no expectation of participation. So there's no pressure to do anything. You can stay, not stay. You can chat, not chat. It doesn't matter. You can feel free to come and go as you please, precisely because the nourishment comes from the held space and your presence and attention from what you are, not from what you do or provide. And all of us together will tend to amplify that. So this is what I propose. And if you are not okay with that, that's totally okay. There's no fear, threat, or control to keep you in sacred space either. But we will give you a moment now to withdraw from the group because we're about to sort of cross the threshold together into our sacred space. And however you want to do it, it's totally okay. And we'll kind of, we'll still meet you in profane space. Those of you who are on my email list, I'm still going to send you emails outside of sacred space. But for now, I just want to pause for a moment to give you an opportunity to make your selection as to whether you want to stay in sacred space and proceed or not. Okay. So I'll give you all a moment to dial that in. Okay. And now for the rest of us, we will now move forward together into our sacred space. And as we cross the threshold into our shared sacred space, I would ask or remind that we are all going to try to observe the principles of proceeding in sacred space. Number one, confidentiality/anonymization, no fear, threat, or control, no commerce, no recommendations, and then no expectation of participation. All right. Welcome to Sacred Space, everybody. Thank you for joining me. One of the best parts of my week, and I hope it is for you too. Okay, so our session topic today for this week will be the difference between healing and curing. So our weekly brainstorm brought us to a reflection on the difference between healing and curing. What the differences mean in terms of our kind of posture and approach to things that kind of just stun us, that happen in our lives, right? Do we try to control and suppress things that disrupt our lives? Or do we try to look for the insight and message of these very same things and look to reconcile with them? So to do this, I will go ahead and invite Gowrie, my editor in Bangalore, on screen. Sorry, we lost her for a second. Oh, shoot. Okay, let me re-invite you.
Hi.
Okay, there you are.
Hi.
Okay, here we are. Here we are. Yay!
Okay, thank you.
So,
Right.
Gary, do you want to tell us about the mythic figure you've selected for this week?
Yeah, so we're going with Asclepius today. And it's turned out to be kind of a series of healing or healing gods, because we touched on Chiron before. And when we did Chiron, I think it kind of made logical sense to move on to Asclepius the next thing, because it's in the same tradition, and there's so much more to talk about when we discuss Asclepius. So that's what we're doing today.
Fantastic. Do you want to lead us through the kind of introduction and the background on Asclepius?
Yeah. So with Asclepius, it's similar to how we did Chiron. It's not so much of a story as it is about, a character sketch, let's say, derived from various texts and sources in Greek literature and Greek mythology. So what we're going to do is talk about Asclepius and who he was and what he means in Greek mythology, right? So now Asclepius, we talked about Chiron and how he was raised by Apollo and how he came to be this deity of healing and many other things, but primarily healing and mentoring, right? Artie, I think I can hear some sounds in the background. I'm not sure.
Sorry.
Static noise. Oh, okay. Oh, you're online.
Yeah.
Okay. So with Asclepius, now Chiron was fostered by Apollo, but Asclepius was the direct son of the god Apollo, and his mother was a mortal named Coronis. But while Coronis was pregnant, and this is how Asclepius's birth came to be, right? So while Coronis was pregnant, she fell in love with another mortal man. And Apollo got to know of this, and he was angry. His sister Artemis was angry, and she killed Coronis. And while Coronis was on a funeral pyre, that's when Apollo realized what was going on. She was pregnant, and her womb had this unborn child. And he felt sorry, and he immediately went to rescue the baby by cutting open the womb of the burning Coronis. And this is thought to have been the first cesarean section in human history, right? And then once Apollo literally snatched the baby out of the fire, he took the baby to the centaur Chiron, and he requested him to raise the baby as his own. And then Chiron brought up Asclepius. He became his mentor, his foster father. In fact, some of the traditions say that Chiron's daughters were the ones who nursed Asclepius when he was a baby. So it came to be naturally that Asclepius grew up learning the arts of healing, because that's what Chiron himself practiced, and he taught so many others. So while Asclepius was growing up, he became an even more highly regarded and even better healer with some really exceptional skills. So he came to learn about herbs and incantations, drugs and medicine as aids to his healing. And there was that one additional thing that he got as a gift, was that the goddess Athena gave him a bottle of blood from Medusa. Now, Medusa was a gorgon, right, who had the serpents as her hair from her head, and apparently Medusa had this power like gorgons where she could kill a mortal man just by her look. So Athena gave her blood in a bottle to Asclepius, and there's a long story about Athena and Medusa. I think we will cover that in some other day. But the power of Medusa's blood was such that if it was blood from her right side, it was believed to bring a dead person back to life. And even the left side, even though it was a venom, it still had its medicinal properties. So Asclepius, who now was in possession of this really powerful potion, used it to heal people from pain and diseases, and sometimes even to bring them back from the dead. And then Asclepius started to travel from town to town and to see who needed healing. And he started to heal people. He started to bring people back from the dead. And it is said that Asclepius could heal even blindness. He could heal even snake bites. And this is something very special about Asclepius, is his connection with the snake, with the serpent. There's this, symbol of Asclepius, which is quite well known. That is, the rod of Asclepius, which is basically the staff that he holds, but this staff is wrapped around by a snake. And this is something that this motif of the serpent, comes back over and over in the legend of Asclepius. So the thing about Asclepius is, one of the deadliest things that could happen to you in the ancient world is a snake bite. People knew or believed that, you can't recover from a snake bite, and that was it. People died from snake bites. And that was it, right? There was no cure to it. There was no bringing it back. But Asclepius could bring back the dead. So literally he could heal even snake bites. And when this kind of skill and the healing talent and ability became so powerful as to the fact that only he could do this and no one else could, but he also used it generously to help people. Now this started, problems, right? So, if you could look at, very little is known about Asclepius's life, but if you looked at his personal life, his family, we know that he was married to a goddess called Epione. And Epione is, interestingly, the goddess of soothing. He had 9 children. He had 3 sons and 6 daughters. All of them were healers, right? And, his daughters, the most famous ones are Hygeia, from where we get the word hygiene, and Panacea. And Panacea is still used as one of the medical terms even today. So all of his children were healers, right? And Asclepius himself healed even Philoctetes, and we've covered the story of Philoctetes in one of our past sessions. He healed Philoctetes from his snake bite. So there is this whole powerful kind of entity of healing, if you consider him and his family. And they performed miraculous cures. They brought back dead people to life. And here is something that the gods thought, this crossed the line, right? You can heal all you want, but you can't revive dead people. Now that's seriously kind of endangering nature's balance, and the balance that is protected and ensured by the gods. So Hades was now outraged, because Hades thought that Asclepius was crossing the line and snatching something that belonged to him, the souls of dead people. Hades, the god of the underworld, and the dead souls rightfully belonged to him. So he complained to Zeus, right? And he said, well, this can't go on. We need to do something about this. And Zeus agreed, because Zeus was in charge of, normalcy in the world above. And he knew that things would go out of balance if people started coming back to life, and there was practically like no death. So now, to stop Asclepius and to stop things from going out of hand, he took his weapon of lightning, thunderbolt, right? He struck Asclepius down and thus ended Asclepius's, whole tradition of healing. So with this action, right, Zeus and Hades made sure that there was no more bringing dead people back to life. But the tradition of Asclepian healing did continue, because now there were temples of Asclepius all around, the Mediterranean and Greece. And this was a temple where people would go for healing. And this is the interesting connection again with snakes, is that, people would not only go to seek healing with all kinds of pains and diseases, there was an active use of snakes in healing at these temples, where priests of the Asclepian healing tradition would use these snakes, in their healing arts. So, and Asclepius now became a healing god. And even Zeus recognized this. Zeus was fair enough to recognize the great service that Asclepius offered to humanity. And just like with Chiron, he turned Asclepius into a constellation, Ophiuchus, where the constellation is basically the image of a man holding a snake. And that's how Asclepius was given immortality, to live forever in the sky. But also, at the request of Apollo, Zeus also gave him a seat at Mount Olympus as a god of healing. And that's how, then there were temples in his honor, and that's how the healing tradition continued. So so that's briefly about Asclepius. Artie, would you like to come back and share your notes and what do you have to say?
All right. Let me get my video back up here. There I am. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That was wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you.
So let me start with a version of my usual question, which is, so having marinated in the story of Asclepius for, a week or more, right?
Mm-hmm.
What part of his pattern, his archetype, speaks to you the most? Where do you enter into Asclepius?
I think I must share a dream of mine that you read years ago. And this is interesting, because until, we started discussing the Greek tradition a few years ago, I was aware of quite a few characters from, Greek mythology and Greek tragedies and Greek myth. But Asclepius is someone I didn't know. I mean, it just goes to show, right? So the healing is just so suppressed in today's world that even someone who's somewhat familiar with the Greek myth doesn't know Asclepius, right? Because he's just not talked about much.
Right.
So when I brought this dream to you is when you mentioned Asclepius to me, and I was completely taken aback. And this was a dream that I used to have as a child, right into my teenage years. It was a recurring dream. And it used to keep coming to me all the time. And there were various, changes and differences in each dream, but there was a common pattern, which was that I saw a snake coming towards me and then climbing up onto my body, by twirling round my leg, while I would be
Your right
sitting.
leg, right? I remember. Sorry,
Yeah.
it's all flashing back to me now.
Yeah, so it would just sort of coil around my leg and try to come up and climb up on my body, and that would just terrify me so much. And I'd be sitting there, kind of paralyzed, not knowing what to do, not having enough courage to even scream out. And I would sometimes wake up from sleep because I was so scared of this dream. And this just went on for years and years and years. And I didn't know dreams could be read. I didn't know anything about symbols and motifs and patterns. The only thing I thought was, oh my God, this is just scary. And I don't know why it keeps again and again. And I forgot about it. After a while, it just stopped. And I forgot about it. And when I started doing dream reading as part of healing, when I started working with you, that's when I remembered it and wondered what it meant, why you used to have that over and over. And funnily, as I started wondering about it, I started getting different variations of that dream again. And when I mentioned it to you first, and you asked me, do you mean when it comes up on your body and climbs up your leg, do you mean coils around? And I said, yes, it coils around my leg. And you showed me a picture of the Asclepian rod and asked, like this? It was like this. And you said, well, then, that reminds me of the Asclepian rod. I'm like, what? So it's shocking. But when you did mention Asclepius and explain to me, it felt right, not in the sense of, oh, that makes logical sense, but in the sense that I think I know that that's what it means. So it's amazing.
I remember asking, like, did it coil up and bite you? Did it hurt you? And you were like, no.
Yeah, it never hurt me, right?
It wasn't attacking you. It was like making a sign, a symbol.
Yeah, so it was just that the act of coiling. But even the fear, at first I thought I was afraid because it's a snake,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And but then later I realized the fear also is something very deep about the message. I knew what it was saying, and I was afraid of what message it was giving me, because it's terrifying to get a message from a healer. As a healer, it's not something that is easy to kind of digest. So it's not unsurprising that I was terrified. So kind of I get that, but it's amazing to me even to this day to know that you get something in your dream, a motif, which your conscious mind doesn't know or hasn't seen it, but has been given out as wisdom from these really ancient civilizations and traditions. And the fact that it can appear anywhere in the world through dreams as a message is just so fascinating. So powerful. So when we were talking about Chiron, to answer your questions to where I enter into this, when we were talking about Chiron and we talked about how he raised Asclepius, I was thinking this is a legacy of healing tradition that's universal. It's not just restricted to Greek mythology.
Absolutely.
The ancient Greek civilization. It's universal and it's relevant even today.
It's human. It's human.
So I think it would make it would be completely appropriate and right to kind of honor this and talk about it. Chiron the last session, and I thought it would be incomplete if we didn't honor Asclepius as well as the progressive session. Yeah.
Thank you. I had forgotten all about that dream. Thank you for reminding me. I guess you're a healer.
And that's
Oh yeah.
not
Oh yeah.
completely
Okay. All right.
scary. Thank you.
Good. 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 Okay. So, gosh, should we just? There's so much to say here.
Mhm.
I do want to make the quick comment here on the nature of archetype. Right. This serpent coiling up a staff
Mhm.
is archetypal. Right.
Yeah.
And we've said this in multiple talks in the past, like explaining what archetype is. But the idea here is that you see this all the time, where, like in your case, you have this image come to you in a dream.
Mm.
You've never heard of Asclepius. You don't know anything about, the rod or what. Even if you've seen it on a sign or whatever, there's no like. You can say it's a subconscious association, but that just means you don't know, right?
Yeah.
When someone says, "Oh, it's just chance," it's just unconscious. That's just a fancy way of saying like I have no effing clue. So if you say that doesn't count. You're just saying you don't know. And so when we think about archetype, the reason an archetype can show up in a dream for you
Mhm.
and have that meaning for you, even though you didn't learn the meaning in your schooling or education or any kind of exposure,
Mhm.
is because an archetype comes from below. It's part of like, if you're a developer or a programmer, it's part of like the class libraries of the OS we're all built on, right? Of the
Mhm.
operating system we're all built on. Those codes are there, those archetypes are there. And so when historians argue over like, well, did the Christ figure come as a symbol that was diffused through Persia into like all these other places? We know that this image popped up in multiple civilizations at the same time. We have to find the trade routes. We have to find exactly how, the idea of virus got from one place to the next.
Yeah.
And the alternative is not that it was like diffusion over sort of conscious talking and writing and other things like that. It's that it spontaneously comes up in multiple places.
Yeah.
Because the common element in all these places, the snake going up the staff,
Mhm.
is of course that there are humans in all these places.
Yeah.
And so wherever a human goes, the archetypal library goes with her. Right. So that's why this symbol can come up in you. And then we kind of look to all these different sort of reference points to try to read and say, okay, well, this thing is flashing on the dashboard of your car, this like snake coiling up around the thing. And of course, the more literate you are in mythic form and fairy tale and all that, the more of a library you can have to say, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And I would show you the picture. Is it like this? And you're like, oh my gosh, that's it. What is that? That's my leg. And it's like, oh yeah, okay, let me give you the background on this snake thing.
Yeah.
And several years later, like, here we are. Two healers like yucking it up on a live sacred space on Sunday. Okay, so should I dive into some of my notes here?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then just feel free to pop in and out, just whatever you want to do,
Right.
So following from the Chiron session last week, this week we are talking about Asclepius, who is for me personally, is near and dear to my heart. Asclepius, I take as a kind of patron god, right? Asclepius as the god of healers. And before I dive in, I would just like to take a pause and say that I offer this session in thanks to Asclepius, in love and in his honor. Now, Asclepius in this story is on the same level as Chiron and Hephaestus, whom we've spoken about in the past. They were all orphaned at birth, right? Basically discarded, exiled at birth. Then, like all great heroes, right? Because Asclepius is a hero, he is taken and mentored by Chiron himself, right? Exactly in the same way as Heracles and Jason and Achilles were all mentored by Chiron himself. And under the tutelage of Chiron, he is taught all of the healing arts. And he kind of has this double pedigree, right? Where he is the direct son of Apollo, who is himself the god of healing, a nephew of Artemis, Apollo's sister, and Artemis, of course, is the patron goddess of midwives, and kind of a patron goddess of me as well, right? My name is Artie, which, depending on the track you use, I'm basically named for Artemis, right? I'm the masculine agent of Artemis, right, on the earth. And healing is a kind of midwifery, right? Patron goddess midwives. I'll talk about that in a bit more. And then raised and trained by Chiron. If that weren't enough, he was favored by Athena, given the Medusa blood by Athena. All kinds of amazing stuff going on here. And so he is a great healer. And he succeeds in healing so well that he is even able to bring the dead back to life. Now, you can take that literally, as he's like, Jesus and the Lazarus, calling him out of the tomb. But you can also take it metaphorically, where after you die, right, in the Greek system, you go down as a shade into the underworld, the realm of Hades, and Asclepius then can bring you back up. Almost so successfully, right, that Asclepius himself is killed, right, and himself undergoes transformation and goes into the underworld. Zeus kills, i.e. transforms him. When you see death in a dream or fairy tale, it is a symbol of transformation mythopoetically. It doesn't necessarily mean biological death. Said another way, biological death, of course, is one form of transformation, but it's not the only one. Over the course of a single biological life, for instance, you will go through many deaths and transformations, from child to adult, from adult to sort of elder, et cetera, right? And here, the kind of signal marker of this path of Asclepius, of this labyrinthine, serpentine path of Asclepius himself, is here, where he is born soaked in grief, just like Hephaestus and Chiron. Himself snatched from the jaws of the underworld initially, as Apollo snatched him out of Coronis's body on the funeral pyre. And so favored with this pedigree of healing that he's able to bring back the dead, right? In other words, he is able to, what does it mean when you bring back the dead? He is able to midwife the completion of transformation, right? When we talk about transformation, we say caterpillar down to cocoon and then up to butterfly. So after you die, you go down into the cocoon phase. And when you come back up, like the risen Christ, right? You come back out as a butterfly, as a more spiritual being, because you have wings, you're flying in the air realm, no longer crawling on the ground realm. And the one who helps you out of the cocoon is your midwife, is your ritual elder in transformation, your guide, your Yoda, your Obi-Wan Kenobi, your Morpheus, et cetera, your Gandalf, right? These are all kind of very similar mythopoetic symbols. But the basic pattern is that you have something bad happening, right? You're the caterpillar, you start going through this transformation, you resist, you finally surrender, you plunge into the world of the underworld. Basically, in real life, when you do this, you go deeply into grief. And all the past sessions are relevant here, where I talk about the nature of grief and what that looks like, into containment and pressure of the cooking pot, of the tomb, of the cocoon, that transforms into the womb that births you. Okay. Similar to, as we've been saying for over a year now, the containment and pressure of the pandemic being transformative, right? Us holding us down in lockdown, and then stuff, chemical bonds breaking and transforming while we're down there in containment, right? Something happens down there which brings you to profound transformation, and then back to wholeness and reconciliation with all these parts that were not a part of you before. And then you come back up. So very similar to the risen Christ, like the butterfly coming out of the cocoon. And similar to Asclepius coming back up out of the underworld, right after he was sent there by Zeus, into the constellation of the heavens. right? So very similar to Christ, he goes down into the underworld, comes back up, and doesn't stay here. He goes up bodily into the heavens. That's what Christ did, and Asclepius metaphorically basically did the same thing. He is now, in the constellation. You can see him in the night sky. Now, traditionally, people have read the death of Asclepius as an allegorical punishment for his hubris. Well, the old chap got greedy. He started, sort of taking all this money and sort of bringing people back from the dead. So Zeus punished him. So that's if you read it allegorically. If you read it symbolically, and there's this dichotomy between reading things symbolically versus allegorically, which we covered in a past session, and I think Gary can put that link up. If you read it symbolically, Asclepius continues with his healing process and skill, right? And you can see he's not necessarily snatching souls backwards out of Hades. He's helping them complete the cycle and back up, right? You could say he's helping the butterfly out of the cocoon. And in the process of doing this so well, not as a punishment, but a transformation, he undergoes his own transformation. He then is sent into his own cocoon, into the power of the chthonic, the underworld. And Hades even conspires with Zeus to effect this transformation, not as punishment, but as transformation. And he gets elevated then to this godlike level. Okay, he is after that death and transformation, enshrined, sainted, if you will, as a god, which then, right, because you say, what's the point of undergoing this transformation? Well, the caterpillar becomes a butterfly. The butterfly has much greater range, can sort of produce offspring, et cetera, et cetera. With Asclepius, where he is a human healer, he dies and then it's brought back and then elevated to godlike status. That allows him as a healer to reach more people. Because now, instead of traveling to the physical guy Asclepius in his hut, people in the ancient world can now simply pray to Asclepius because he is a god now and therefore more accessible to everyone. Because he was raised to god status, then it was appropriate to pray to him for health, and that's what the ancients did. As people prayed to him more and more, Asclepian temples were established all over the Mediterranean in the ancient world. At these temples, you would go to receive healing, and we'll talk about what that means. And the estimate is that in the 1,000 years between 500 BC before Christ and 500 AD after Christ, there were something like 1,500 to 2,000 Asclepian temples all over the ancient Mediterranean. The last Asclepian temple, and you ask, why did these go down in the 500 years after Christ? It's because the Christians went and destroyed all the Asclepian temples. Right? The last Asclepian temple, which was in Athens, the last holdout, stronghold, was finally burned and destroyed, I think in like 540, 550 AD by the Christian bishop of Athens. And they're still around. You can still visit some of them, but they're all in ruins. They're not functioning today anymore. And the very simple reason for this, and this is not blame or bad, it's just historical kind of flow from one epoch to another. The simple reason is that the Christian Christ is their version of Asclepius, right? Christ is a healer. And let's just go through the full pattern. Christ, like Asclepius, born of a god, right? Orphaned, basically exiled from that god, has unbelievable healing powers, can even raise the dead, Christ and Lazarus, and then is martyred when this power goes too far. Goes down into the underworld, does stuff in the underworld, like the 3 days where Christ was in the underworld. There's a whole sort of separate tradition of him teaching the souls in hell. And then comes back himself out of the cocoon, doesn't stay on earth for very long, and then ascends bodily up into heaven. That's the Christ pattern, and it's exactly the Asclepian pattern. And so as the church took on these aspects of the Asclepian healing archetype, they had to destroy the older god. And this is why you can't go to an Asclepian temple today, at least not in its original form. So that was the archetype of Asclepius. It is in the pattern of a healer. Chiron is one aspect of the healing archetype. Asclepius is another. Turn it another 45 degrees and you see like for instance, Hippocrates as another face of the healer archetype. So there is this pattern of the healer archetype in Asclepius that is very, very interesting for our purposes. Because all of us have a healer in us, right? We all have a Hercules in us. We all have an Apollo, a Zeus, a Hephaestus, and we all have a Chiron, and we all have an Asclepius in us as well. And the part of the pattern that's interesting for us is the Asclepian style of healing. Okay, how did Asclepius affect healing when you went to one of these temples? Now we know about these temples. A couple of years ago, I was actually in Greece, and some dear friends of mine, actually one of them is an advisee, she's probably watching the audience now, hosted me and actually took me to Epidaurus, which is one of the sites of the original Asclepian temple, which is about an hour or two outside of Athens. We visited the temple. It was super moving for me to actually be on the physical ground where the first Asclepian temple was. There was a beautiful grove. The land was like clearly sacred. The temple complex was like an entire campus. It had a gymnasium, a running track, dormitories, a stadium, a sort of theater. This whole sort of ginormous spa kind of campus for the people who came from all over the ancient world for healing. And actually, let me do a quick screen share here. I've got a couple of hopefully you can see this. So yeah, so this is the Asclepian, the rod of Asclepius, a serpent coiling around a staff. And the proper form of this is that the serpent crosses the staff at 7 points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which correspond to the 7 chakras. And when we talk about the 7 chakras, there's a talk when we go through all the 7 chakras and explain the sort of the relative significance of each one. You see as the snake goes up, as it ascends, it becomes thicker and stronger. The head is at the top, and it kind of affords this kind of evolution of progress, this progression of development over time. And it is the healing symbol, right? So the more you heal, the more you sort of elevate along these sort of things. But it's also circumambulatory, right? Another way of thinking about this is that the labyrinth, the sharp version or the classical labyrinth that I'm always talking about, is like a serpent, right? The serpent starts in, circumambulates all around, and the head ends up tucking into the middle of the labyrinth itself. And you can think of this as like if you turn the labyrinth this way, you're looking at the serpent sort of coiling in this direction around the center. Circumambulation. This is Asclepius with the serpent, his totem animal. Close up. This is the actual temple, the theater at Epidaurus. It's still used to this day. I think Pavarotti, Bocelli have all like sort of sung here, performed here. And then we have the labyrinth. Let me come back to the labyrinth, actually. How do I, sorry. Okay. So what would happen at an Asclepian temple? Obviously, no one's completely sure, right? But there are fragments, accounts from travelers, and legend also, which counts as well. And what we think happened in these temples is that you would show up like at a spa, right? You would register, they would bathe you, purify you, and then you would be given perhaps your robe and slippers, right? And then you would be sent into the abaton, which was separate from the dormitories, right? There's sort of the hotel rooms where you stay as you're getting ready for your treatment. And then when you go in for your treatment, you might be sent to the abaton, which was a special building where you would sleep on the floor all around this huge, larger-than-life statue of Asclepius. As you slept on the floor, all of these wild and yet non-venomous snakes would freely roam around the entire campus. Snakes and dogs were the totem animals of Asclepius. They were honored there. They were not killed. They were like regularly fed, but they were not tame. They were wild. They would come and go as they please. And you would be prescribed to sleep there for 2 or 3 days, basically as long as needed, until the god, either in his human form, his godlike form, or in a snake form, came to you in a dream. When they came to you in a dream, they would explain what is going on. They would give a symbol, and then you'd wake up, and the priest would be there, and you would, tell the priest your dream, and they would sort of work with you to interpret it. The dream could be self-obvious. It could be a direct message telling you what to do. You have a headache, go and get some aspirin, right? Or the dream could be a more mythopoetic dream, right? It would tell you of things, of patterns that are requiring a deeper level of reconciliation. But the overall approach to healing is that you would enter the sanctuary, this sacred space. You would let your guard down and surrender, right? Knowing through reputation that it's okay to do that here. And then in this state of surrender, you receive an insight of what to do, not from the priest, right? Wagging his finger at you. Oh, you better be a good person. You better be a moral person. Not from the priest, but it comes from within you, incubated by the sacred sort of nurturing environment of the temple. The guidance, the cure comes from within you. The dream comes from within you, and it comes outside to guide you. The priests are there, the temple sort of attendants, are there specifically to guide you and support you, not to tell you what to do, but to interpret your dream to help you receive the message as you see fit. Does that, so for those of you who do healing with me, this should be sounding familiar when we do dream work, right? There's another feature of the Asclepian temple, which I only discovered in the last few years and then saw and visited when I was in Greece a couple of years ago. And that is that in addition to the abaton, there is another structure called the tholon, Tholon, which is a structure. Let me put this back up here. Where did my thing go? Oh, there we are. Which is a structure, which is a labyrinth. It's this. So about 3 or 4 years ago, I was like nerdily getting into sort of the study of labyrinth, and then also the study of the sort of deeper layers of Asclepius. And those of you who have been on retreat with me or have heard the labyrinth talk, I think we talked about the labyrinth in Live Sacred Space as well. We go all into the sort of serpentine, labyrinthine structure of the labyrinth, and how that is an archetype that is very powerful for healing. So at the time, I had no idea that labyrinths were actually a part of Asclepian healing practice. I was just kind of like looking into, I was kind of doing the Indiana Jones thing, right, where I was looking at like obscure references, acquiring rare books. And there was this one rare book on Asclepius that I was finally able to acquire. I was reading through it, and I saw one black and white photo, this photo, of the ruins of the temple grounds at Epidaurus, which my friends then ultimately took me to a couple of years later. And I looked at that, and I was like, what the heck is that? That kind of looks like a labyrinth. And I was like, okay, that's kind of crazy. And this is an aerial view of the labyrinth. And what it was actually a 3-circuit labyrinth underground. These are columns of the above kind of temple portico. But basically, you would enter at point B, go around, right? It's a labyrinth, not a maze, so you can't get lost. And you circumambulate into the middle, and then, you know, it's an interesting question of what actually happened down there. And so what we think happened in the Tholon, in the labyrinth, is that there was no door into the labyrinth. You had to be lowered in by a ladder, and then the labyrinth was covered. It was pitch black down there, and they think that there would be running water from a sacred spring. So there's running water down there about ankle deep, fed by a natural spring, and there are also snakes in the water. We think non-venomous, but we can't be sure. And patients or temple participants, whatever, were put down there and left down there for 2 or 3 days at a time, physically circumambulating until they, I don't know, passed out or were hallucinating. You know, I don't know if they had like waivers of liability back then in the ancient world, but you can imagine the waiver they had to sign was probably 50 pages long, right? So if you didn't get dreams while sleeping in the Abaton, you got left in the labyrinth, and you definitely got visions and dreams when you were down there. When they pulled you back up out of the pit, as it were, out of the cocoon, out of the belly of the beast, you definitely had a lot of stuff to share when you came back. And when I was there 2 years ago, I actually visited the physical labyrinth. They have all this sort of supportive structure. They're kind of doing a restoration. And this is the actual labyrinth. This photo was taken 2 years ago. When I was there, I almost got a chance to climb down into it, but then the guard caught me and whistled me away. When patients would come and get cures, they would then give a sort of gift, an offering, in the form of a sculpture of the part. So this person was cured of his deafness. I think this is like a king of the Gauls or something. Caduceus, king of the Alpine Gauls, cured of deafness, and then they offered gifts, and this is like a sort of testimonial that they would offer. So that was Asclepian healing. Now, this is very different from modern Western medicine. In modern Western medicine, you go into a hospital, which comes from the ancient word hospitum, which is sanctuary. So it's still safe. You still submit, you sign all the forms and sort of, you know, releases of liability. It's still a relatively sacred space, but the emphasis in a modern hospital is on Hippocratic curing, not Asclepian healing. Hippocrates was a disciple of Asclepius. And when he learned all the stuff from Asclepius, he took the path of healing in a different direction, more in the realm of the empirical and the physical. So Hippocrates' bias, and this is not a bad thing. I mean, Hippocrates' bias was on the symptom, right? So if you have a sort of painful elbow, Hippocrates, a Hippocratic healer, would look at the elbow, try to figure out if it's inflamed, if it's strained or sprained, and basically put your elbow into a sling and basically cure the symptoms of the painful elbow. And would tend to not look at the underlying imbalance, right, that brought your elbow to that state of affairs. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, right? The empirical scientific approach to curing, the Western medicine sort of approach, has been fabulously successful, right? But it is just one side of a textured and rich story. The curing side is fully valid, but the healing side of things, the Asclepian side of things, by accidents of history and the rise of Christianity, has been actively suppressed. And there's no reason we care one way or another, except that when we bring back aspects of Asclepian healing, they are helpful, right? They are very, very helpful. So the typical curing attitude will be, well, you've got a painful elbow. Why is that? I've been playing too much tennis. Well, okay, so that's tennis elbow then, and we'll sort of wrap it up and work on your backhand, try to do a proper backhand so you don't get this kind of tennis elbow in the future. That's fine. Perfectly successful, very, very helpful. An Asclepian healer would say, oh, you have what are you coming in for? Well, I have this tennis elbow thing. So you play a lot of tennis. Have you always played a lot of tennis? No, I've played a lot more tennis in the past year or the past 3 months. An Asclepian healer kind of metaphorically would say, huh, that's interesting. Why do you think you're playing so much more tennis? And then it may come out that, well, my spouse and I are like having fights and I need to get out of the house, right? Right, so that underlying core root level imbalance, if reconciled, right, will lead to less tennis elbow, et cetera, et cetera. And ideally you hit it with both, right? You give the person ibuprofen for the inflamed tennis elbow, and then you also sort of send them back with some reflections on how to sort of make your home life more reconciled such that you don't need to escape all the time, okay? Or with regard to something like depression or low mood, right? The typical curing attitude will be, depression, I know what that is. Your serotonin levels are too low. So let me give you this pill to kick your serotonin levels back up. And does that work? Yeah, that works. It's been fabulously successful. But the Asclepian question would be, well, I'm not worried about that. I'm more asking about, so you say the serotonin levels are low, and that's all you care about because that's the lever you're going to hit to make the depression go away. But my question as an Asclepian healer is like, okay, well, why are the serotonin levels low? Right? And the Hippocratic healer who is biased towards science and medicine, which is valid, will say, well, it's just the diet or some kind of genetic imbalance. Basically, trying to throw anything out there, right? Diet, environment, exercise, to avoid the deeper question of, is it something emotional? Is it something archetypal? And the natural reason why you avoid that is because if I keep it to diet, if I keep it to allergens, if I keep it to all this stuff that I can control, hint, hint, then I don't need to face the factor that I may not be able to control. And those of you who have done healing know that this is what I'm all about. Where it's like you find the thing in you that you are suppressing and you don't control it. You talk to it and you ask, what is the matter at this deeper level? Right? The bias or the skew of Asclepian healing is a trust in the overall sort of, universe really, that you can give up control and take a posture of curiosity, wonder, and reconciliation. And the attitude is basically, we'll find our way in that way. And if we can't find our way through reconciliation, then your elbow isn't really going to matter either way, right? We've got deeper problems than your elbow. Another way of seeing it is that Hippocratic healing or curing looks at everything as outside of yourself and biases away from looking at anything inside of yourself. Right? The focus is on the things outside of me, even my body as a thing outside of me. Well, we'll just like put you in a sling and slap you on the behind and get you back out on the playing field to keep scoring goals for us. Right? Get back to work. Get back to being productive. All of which kind of very studiously, very diligently avoids the question of what is going on inside of me, on the other side of the line. In other words, what do you fear? What are you suppressing? What do you feel repulsed by inside of you? When we look inside, we actually use what is seemingly in the outer world, dreams, things happening in our outer life, and also this outer body that is clearly not me. It's just my body. I just use it as a vehicle when in reality it is you. Your body is you. We use all the symptoms that we see out there as reflections of patterns going on within us, as clues, right? As entry points. We look to the physical to see what that might be reflective of at the emotional level, at the feeling level. And then from there to figure out what exactly it is you're turning away from. And then try not to pummel it into submission, but to reconcile with it. It's clearly it's clearly a powerful part of you. Right? It's disrupting things with your spouse to the point where you're being driven out of the house to look for things to do, like tennis. Whatever factor that is that's doing that, right? It's not trivial. It's very powerful, and you know, the wiser the wiser gamester, right, will not seek to avoid it, right, but will seek to engage it. We've talked about the rod of Asclepius. Another way to read the rod is that serpent, as we've said time and again, is feminine. The rod obviously is masculine, it's more phallic. And you can think of the serpent coiling up around the rod as a symbol of inner masculine, inner feminine harmony, integration. And by the way, full integration across all 7 chakras, right? Against all levels of human development. Even between animal, the snake, and the plant, which is the staff. Classically, the staff is not just a piece of wood, it's flowering. It has green leaves still attached to it. Strictly speaking, it will still be a tree growing out of the ground. Let me show this to you. Yeah, this staff here, right, will be like, actually like a live tree growing out of the ground. And this treatment of the snake and the tree and the staff is seen as like this healing totem, this aspect of nature that we look to for reconciliation, healing, collaboration. And of course, the other great place tradition where you see a serpent in a tree is in Genesis, in the Abrahamic patriarchal tradition, where the serpent, the feminine, is vilified and suppressed, right? Whereas in the Greek tradition, it's exactly the opposite. It's the center of all healing. Just a funny side story that kind of I was reminded of when Gary told our story of like the dream of the symbol of the snake coiling up her leg. In the American medical system, the symbol of medicine, right, is often a staff with 2 serpents, not 1 serpent, 2 serpents coiling up and the heads meeting at the top. This staff is actually not the rod of Asclepius. It is actually the Caduceus of Hermes. Okay, so what is the Caduceus of Hermes? And we'll talk about who Hermes is. Why is the archetype of Hermes the key kind of symbol that's gracing the logos of all these pharma companies and hospitals in the United States of America? Legend has it that during World War I, or shortly after, I think during World War I, or even before World War I, like 1912, 1913, they were like establishing the Army Corps of Engineers, right, to support medical infrastructure, to just sort of build all this good stuff. This is like how it was told to me. And someone, as they were putting together this new organization, said, hey, you know, we're like a humanitarian org, we're not here to fight, we're here to build. We should put that snake thing that's of physicians and healers on it. And that'll be a nice symbol to sort of give us the right kind of blessing and structure and archetype, right, for our organization. And some junior officers said, well, what is it, Sarge? Like, what is this thing? And the sergeant said, well, you know, there's like a rod in the middle, and there are like 2 serpents that coil up. Now, back then, there's no internet. Everyone was moving fast because it was in the middle of World War I, and no one verified. And I think probably the junior officer said, you know, Sarge, are you sure? Is it 1 serpent or 2? And the sergeant's like, well, I'm pretty sure it's 2. Let's just go with 2. So they went ahead with 2 serpents. So the archetype that got stamped as a foundational sort of symbol, right? And these symbols have power, was not the rod of Asclepius, not the Asclepian rod of healing, which would have been powerful and sort of all the sort of, you know, reconciliation and sacred space and looking for feedback and insight from within you, but was rather the Caduceus of Hermes, which is the two serpents, which is a completely different affair. The archetype is completely different. Right? Hermes, who is worthy of all honor as well, is not the god of medicine or the healing, but Hermes is the god of merchants, of business and exchange, and of rogues, tricksters, and thieves. So when you think about the American medical system over the past, say, 100 years, you realize that it has definitely gone in the direction more of profit and business and rogues and tricksters and thieves than it has gone in the direction of healing, reconciliation, looking for guidance from within. As Joseph Campbell would say, the archetype you follow matters. Right? Those of you who are doing Bliss program with me, we're talking about navigating from one archetype to the next. The archetype you follow matters. If you start with, as Campbell would say, a defective archetype, I used to be like, now I don't go that far as to call something defective, but now thinking about, the white-black archetype in America and other archetypes like that, I'm starting to finally come around to Campbell's view, where it's like there are archetypes that are defective or that are not appropriate for the current state we're in. Right? But if you start with a defective archetype, the whole thing will be defective because that's the DNA you've stamped it with. Now, who's to blame here? You can't blame the sergeant. Right? He had good intention. You can sort of blame Hermes, but Hermes, in slipping his Caduceus in and pushing out the rod of Asclepius, was kind of just doing his job, because Hermes is a trickster. He got you right in the joint of American medicine, put his Caduceus there, and that energy of trickster, rogue energy, business first, right, has flowed through the entire medical system. It's not a European thing. European healthcare is completely different. When you walk around Europe, when you walk around Paris, all the pharmacies have that green sort of neon animated sign, and you see the symbol. It's the rod of Asclepius. It's only one serpent. Only in America do we have the two serpents. And that's kind of, I don't know if it's causal. As we talk about archetype, it's more correlative. The lava vent from underneath, the same thing that stuck the Caduceus of Hermes on our medical stuff and pharma companies, is the same thing that's like impacting the actual workings of the machinery. So no harm, no foul, no blame, right? I mean, there has been harm, but no blame per se. But here we are, right? And so an interesting question is, in the medical world, how do we get out of this archetype? I don't know, right? Will actually changing company logos help? If you do it for this reason, then it's not just the logo you're changing, it's the inner sort of feeling you have. And that's evidence that some deeper archetype is changing. And so the pattern of Asclepius and the tradition of Asclepian healing is very, very dear to me and sacred to me at a personal level. Because for me personally, it is a major strand of my bliss, right? I'm a healer. And when I sort of practice healing with you, I never tell you what you should do, right? I don't care about curing. I look to you for insight. I look to your dreams. I ask you how you're feeling, right? So I don't care about making the symptoms go away, right? If you simply want your nightmares to just go away, your doctor can probably give you a pill and just nuke the nightmares and make that all go away, right? You're the sovereign of your life. It's whatever works for you. However, if you have curiosity and wonder about what is going on in your inner world, then you go to Asclepius, right? They will try then, an Asclepian healer will try mythopoetically, not to take the allegorical fear, threat, and control lesson, but to take symbolic insight, right? How does this nightmare map to your real life, right? That is for you to decide. In our healing work, every week, for instance, we have our live group advising session. Our advisees are in the abaton of our programs, right? And then their dreams fire up, and then we read the dreams to help them, right? You decide what your dream means, but we're just kind of brainstorming, kicking the ball around with you. Preside itself is like a labyrinth. There's no sequence of our programs. You just enter where you feel so moved, and then we kind of figure it out as we go. And above all, Right? We never tell you what you should do because I don't know what you should do because I'm not the sovereign of your life. You are, right? You are the sovereign of your life. You are the golfer. I'm the caddy, right? So I'm gonna advise you and be like, yeah, you know, this green on the 9th hole, it breaks right pretty hard, even though it doesn't seem like it. So be careful. And you don't have to listen to me. It's your scorecard you're playing, right? Or another image, you are the mother, I am the midwife, right? The baby comes out is yours. You decide who you have the baby with, all the rest of it. What I try to provide is a supportive, nurturing role in sacred space, ideally devoid of fear, threat, and control. Now, just like we always say about sacred and profane is not bad. It's just a different flavor. And then once you're aware of the two flavors, you decide the right mix of flavor for yourself. And in exactly the same way, with Asclepian healing versus Hippocratic curing is not bad, right? When I have a splitting headache, I take ibuprofen too, right? When I have an allergy or whatever, I take a Zyrtec too. But the key is to know what the different flavors are. Once you know there's this tradition called Hippocratic curing and then Asclepian healing, like profane and sacred, you decide, or salty and sweet, right? You decide case by case if you want what the right mix is for you in any given situation. The beauty is that in an ideal situation, you have access to both. Or ideally, you have access to salty and sweet. You have access to sacred and profane, country and Western, right? And you are the creator of the work of art that is your life, right? You make your own choices, but having awareness gives you additional power of choice. Right? As we always say around here, awareness equals choice. So this, by the way, is also why the concept of sacred space is so important in healing. Because when you're coming out of a labyrinth like this, right? I mean, it's not underground and, you know, with snakes roaming around in ankle-deep sort of spring water. Hopefully, it doesn't feel quite as bad, right? But when you're wandering around the labyrinth of, like, you know, the LGA archives and listening to video after video on like this issue that you're trying to sort of tackle, you are vulnerable, right? When you're in sacred space with me here, we cannot be selling you stuff when you're down there. So that is why the design of Preside, the programs, the sacred space, we do in-person retreats sometimes, but by and large, the bulk of our work is done online. And one of the reasons I love online as an Asclepian healer is because naturally, structurally, you retain so much power, right? Even now, right? You're watching on Facebook, watching on whatever, you're in the comfort of your home. I can see the general numbers, but I don't know exactly who you are, right? At some point, if you don't like what I say, or if it's just too much, you can just close the session. You just swipe away, you hit the X. You can block me, mark me as spam. You will never hear from me again, and all it takes is a couple of taps or clicks. Now, as an Asclepian healer, I like that. I like that, right? In the manner we communicate, right? Ideally, you retain the sovereign power of your own sort of sovereignty. And this is, to me, in full keeping with the tradition of Asclepian style healing. And I think, you know, every now and then when we do actually have an in-person retreat, those can be deep and moving experiences. But the bulk of the work in progress, you know, I think is made online when you're doing like live group advising or something. And when we do in-person retreats, to me, they're kind of more kind of convenient excuses to actually get together in person, meet each other, make new friends in a beautiful place. And then above all for me, to eat good food, right, and talk about nerdy stuff. On our retreats, we don't do any like long hikes or sleep deprivation or starvation to get you hallucinate and get your breakthrough. We don't do it like that. Our retreats are, you know, relaxing and fun. If anything, you'll probably gain weight on a Presidian retreat. Okay, so I think that's most of the notes I had. We could go into exercise. Gary, do you have anything else to add? Do you want to come back in?
Hi, Artie.
Hi.
There's something. All right. I think,
there we go.
It's just fascinating how things come back to you, various stages. When you were talking about Epidaurus and the actual physical labyrinth at the Asclepian temple, you will not believe this. I was just reminded of another dream I had years ago. And I was sitting there kind of completely stunned, realizing that the dream symbols that I had was that of an actual labyrinth in an Asclepian temple. And it looked so different that I didn't make the connection until now when you were explaining the physics and the mechanics of how the temple works. So there was this dream I had in 2014 or 15, I think, around that time. And you know, this was a time of intense grief, loss, pain, and a lot of circumambulation and healing that was happening at that time in my life. And that is when I had this, I kind of had understood a few symbols of what that dream was trying to say and what it meant as an overall general picture. But only now I suddenly realized, well, that was the labyrinth. You know, that was, what you physically experience in the labyrinth in the temple had come to me in the form of a dream picture, right? So this is what I saw. So one day, I mean, in the dream, I look out of the window and it's raining. It's a heavy storm. It's raining. And so I instantly, I don't know what made me do it. I felt unsafe on this second floor apartment that I was living in, right? So I felt unsafe. I felt like I had to get out of the building. So I went into the lift and you know, went down all the way to the basement, not to the ground floor where I could simply get out of the gate and out of the building, but I went all the way to the basement. I was literally lowered into the underground, and when the lift opened and I went out to the basement, the basement was flooded. The basement was flooded, so there was knee-deep water that I was wading in. And I could kind of see all the vehicles that were parked there that were now kind of there was debris everywhere and nothing was in water, right? And I saw snakes kind of swimming in the water. And the water was like dark, it was black. And I was kind of trying to find my way out of the basement up into the ground level. And I find a boat coming in. I actually pull the boat towards me. And I get into the boat and I look around to see who else needs help in rescuing. And I go around, and finally I come up onto the ground level by kind of going around a spiral path, because that's how you go up. I mean, even the building in real life is designed that way. So
like up out of a garage, right? Like the ramps.
Yeah. So I kind of went on the boat up onto the ground level, onto the road outside the building, and it flooded everywhere. You know, there was water, so I was still rowing the boat. And I looked around to see who else needed help, and I find these two dogs at the edge of the road, kind of, you know, getting soaked in the rain. They pull them up and get them onto the boat, and then I keep rowing. And now, sitting here and listening to you telling me about the temple at Epidaurus, we have the snake and we have the dog, which are like the totem animals of Asclepius.
Totally.
And I have knee-deep water that was wading in.
Yep.
Lowered into the basement.
Yep.
And I went circumambulating in a spiral path.
Your old mode of moving forward in your life, the cars, flooded by insight, obsolete, non-functional, and you have to find a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's how you get your inner masculine dogs back.
So
wait, hang on. What happened then?
well, that was the dream. I just
Mm.
roll back up and move on once I rescue the dogs, and I just roll back. That was it. That was where the dream ended, right? And then I think about it now, and it basically is the actual physical mechanism of what the healers subjected the patients to at the temple. And they had to go through the motion physically. And this is at least, in a dream, and the dream is telling me this is what you're going through right now. This is what you're doing in your inside world. You are circumambulating in your deep, dark, desperate labyrinth of grief.
It's a reflection of a state of affairs that is so within you now.
Yeah, it's reflecting the kind of moving through the labyrinth that I'm doing at the moment, which is kind of moving through my pain and grief and loss, and just cooking in my own cauldron of grief, right? So it's kind of showing me that, but to know that it was actually done physically at one time.
Yeah, that the pattern comes from somewhere.
The pattern comes from somewhere, and it's amazing to know that the entire visual was given to me in modern, contemporary, relatable terms.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
The way that I could see, the building is an apartment now. There's an underground basement. Parking.
The snakes are still real.
But there's a boat and all of that. But it's relatable, but the motif is still there, and it just kind of gave out the motif of healing, which is, again, I come back to this, like I said with the other dream. I'm simply amazed at how universal and true these motifs are. And I feel blessed as well that you don't really have to have a kind of education in Greek mythology for these messages to come to you. I mean, it helps to know dream reading, to kind of understand what they're trying to say to you, but then for them to kind of even reach out to you and give these messages, you don't have to be, follower of a certain tradition, or to have a kind of background and education in a certain tradition. I mean, these messages will come to you in terms that you can relate to.
Yeah.
Right. So it's absolutely fascinating to me that, and when I look at that, the whole Asclepian healing motif is one of, circumambulating in the undergrounded grief, in pain and loss, until you find your way back up. And that reminds me of another motif in the Greek mythology, which is the underground river Styx. It's the dark river which borders the underworld with the world above. And it's said that anyone who is dead and passes over to Hades crosses the river Styx, right? But the amazing thing about this river is also, I mean, it's like this river Styx is like the water in the underground labyrinth. In a way, right? So when you cross it, you're actually really just wading through it. The thing about Styx is there was a belief that if you dipped yourself into the river and you came back up, you became invulnerable. And that's what happened to Achilles, right? Because mother dipped him in the river and put him back, he became so strong that no one could defeat him. But I think it's such a great symbol of what happens when you do your motion of circumambulation in grief and you come back up.
Into grief, yeah.
Right? So that's healing. It's not that, you forget your healing and it's completely cured or gone.
Right.
Grief is gone. It's just that, you're able to hold that grief within you and it can't kind of damage you like before.
Well, I mean, at that level, you're invulnerable because I don't even really care if I'm alive, and yet here I am.
Yeah.
And what else are you going to do to me? That's why I'm invulnerable.
Kind of like what Achilles was.
Right.
Like, I don't care what you do to me.
Right. Right.
So,
That's very good. Thank you for that.
fascinating sort of layers of how the Asclepian motifs keep coming back up in our lives. And even though I think we've forgotten most of what Asclepian healing is in the modern world, it's also very heartening that the messages keep coming until we're ready to kind of receive them.
Well, that's the thing I love about this, especially with the dreams you've shared with us. Thank you for sharing those dreams, by the way. Is that we're like, oh, we've lost all this great ancient, wisdom or whatever. But the reality is, it's like, the first priest of that first temple probably even started building the labyrinth because of a dream he or she had. Right? And, you have that dream. You may not end up building a garage that has like flowing water across multiple levels. But, a lot of how we're building Preside, all the stuff I'm doing now and reworking the back end side of like live group advising has all come from basically dream and vision. I would not suffer like this for any other reason other than no good reason to do all the overhauls we're doing right now.
Right.
And it's just really reassuring because it's like these images, as long as we're human, which we are, we will have hearts, lungs, livers, eyes, noses, right? And we will have this, right? This part tends to come to us in dream. But if you want to look at the world through an archetypal lens, it's already all around you. Just open your eyes and look, right? And your outer world is a reflection of what's going on inside of you, right? People are like, oh, I'm just a victim and he was such a jerk. And it's like, nobody's saying he was not a jerk or he should be, he should be excused. There's no excuse for bad behavior. But at the same time, the question is like, why is a jerk like that even in your orbit in the first place? Right? We know there are jerks in the world, but why is this jerk in my orbit? Not to say that there's a blame or something else, but it's like, we know there are things like tumors that happen, right? But not everybody gets tumor. If I have something, the natural question is like, what is it? Is it my lifestyle? Is it my genetics? It doesn't have to be my fault, right? But something is making that thing reflect in your outer world. And instead of saying, oh, it's your fault, you need to be a more, you need to choose your friends better. I mean, maybe that's so, right? But why did I make these poor choices in the beginning? And that's the Asclepian question, to say what more is going on? Forget, we're in the sacred temple, okay? So forget about blame. Oh, it's my dad, my mom, or just forget all that for a second. Once we're back out in the profoundum, we can continue with the lawsuits and blaming and all of that just fine. All right, we're not saying don't do that. But when you are in the sacred space, the question is, leave all that aside for a minute. What is actually going on here? What is the deeper pattern of my life? And not from a pugilistic, I want to fix it and control it, but it's like, is there something in my life that is vetoing my current direction? And clearly, if it's vetoing, not only does it not agree, but it also has a lot of power in my life. So why would I, even absent the veto, why would I ignore this powerful part of me? Right? If there's a dragon in me, I don't want to ignore it because it could, ruin all my plans. But also it's like, if I can reconcile with it, the dragon will fight with me on my side of the armed conflict. And I will win because I'm the only one with a dragon. Right? So that these powerful parts in you that give you tennis elbow, that make you not be able to get out of bed. These are powerful forces within you. And the Asclepian approach philosophically is to say, how are they doing? Are they upset? Right? What would it take to get them, instead of threatening, right? I was a high-tech CEO for many years. We would always be fighting for talent, always, taking engineers out for better dinners, bigger bonuses to get them to come on board, right? And the ultimate question would be that I would sort of throw out there as a CEO would be to say, all right, what's it going to take? You are coming to work with me at my company. What will it take? And he's like, no, Artie, you can't ask me that. It's like, I am asking that. Tell me what it will take. If I can't do it, I can't do it. But I don't want you to go with them. I need you on my team. What will it take? Tell me everything. And then at least I can say no with, an educated guess. And oftentimes they wouldn't even know. They'd have to go back and talk to their spouse and go, well, you said anything. What do I say? And then they come back, and 9 times out of 10, I'd be like, okay, we'll make some adjustments. We can negotiate, but at least we're like talking, right, at this deep level. And to the dragons within you, right, the Christian, the Western, the Abrahamic is what's the archetype? St. George and the dragon. Kill the dragon. Everyone wants to slay the dragon, right? What's the Asclepian model? The Asclepian model is the dragon is not a pathology. The dragon is not a defect. Right? The dragon is a valid force within you. And if it's working against you, the problem is not the dragon. The problem is your disagreement with the dragon, because the dragon's not going away. Right? Just like your lungs are not going away. If you have a problem with your liver, the answer is not to cut your liver out. Right? You need that thing. But to come into reconciliation with it. Ask it what's going on. That to me is the fundamental difference between Asclepian healing and Hippocratic curing. You need both. Both are valid, just like sacred and profane are valid, just like salty and sweet are valid. But once you know there's an alternate flavor, you can start to blend the flavor profile of your life and how you approach your life to suit your taste more closely, so you can be happier. That's the ultimate sort of desire here when we do this kind of work.
To me, it seems like when we think of curing versus healing, or even profane versus sacred, it's like when we choose curing, it's like walking up the street to the temple and then walking up to the gate and stopping there. It kind of buying, incense and fragrances and flowers in the bazaar of the temple, but not actually walking into the temple, but saying, oh, okay, I've done shopping, so I'm going to go back home. But when you choose to kind of look into healing, you first go through the curing process, and then you want to take up the healing process. It's like actually walking into the temple now, going beyond just the streets and shops outside the temple. So it's kind of, if you don't choose to do that, if you don't go into the temple, you're just missing out on one step where you kind of choose not to go beyond curing.
Right.
And that's okay. If you just wanted to shop, that's fine. Right.
Right. That's okay.
But it's just that you're not asking the question of what is beyond this, and let's go visit it. Right.
Well, every now and then, right, when there's a big financial recession, when there's something is threatening people, like everyone starts to pack the churches, right? Everyone goes in when it really hits the fan. Yeah. Almost to the point where you start to wonder archetypally, is that why the powers that be made it hit the fan, right? To get you all to go in, to just sort of retouch that element of the sacred. And so the real question in terms of the artistry and design of your life, and how you will move through the world, how you choose to move through the world, is one of, it's like kids and their parents, right? Do you only call mom and dad when you need money, right? Or do you call for other reasons as well? What kind of relationship do you have there, right? And so the thing is, it's like that old funny story of you can't find your car keys. You can't find your car keys, right? And then you say, oh God, heaven, angels, please help me find my car keys. If you help me find my car keys, I promise I will say 3 Hail Marys and 2 Our Fathers and give you a nice offering when I'm next in church. And not only that, and then you see your car keys on the table, and then you're like, oh, never mind, I got them. And then you take your car keys and you go, right? And it's sort of like, you can look at that from one of two views. Oh, I didn't need you, forget it. And the minute I don't need you, I drop you.
Right.
Which is like, you're kind of being a jerk, right? No one will know. But I mean, you know, right? You know you're being a jerk. And the other view is to say, whoa, that was fast.
Right.
That was fast. Thank you. And instead of saying, oh God, now I have to say like 3 Hail Marys and 2 Our Fathers, it's like, well, you say them, you want to act in good faith. But in addition to that, it's kind of like, hang on a minute. When I asked in a certain way, it was like instantaneous.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And instead of saying like, oh, how do I rub the magic lamp to make it do everything I want? It's like, it's not so much that, but it's more like, so, thanks for the help with the car keys. Just, how are you all? Would you like to talk? I mean, I would like to get to know you. Right? I mean, we know in the backs of our minds, these powers are large and they swirl around us. And we're taught for whatever reason to fear them. And, my attitude is like, not only do you not have to fear them, it's like they're helping you, right? These forces, they love you. They want you to like move forward, but typically to move forward on your bliss. So if you're down this road of like non-bliss, prestige, and just money for its own sake, the more you bring them in, the more they'll start to like rip you away from that track and put you on a different track. And if you don't want to do that, maybe you should try to stay away from them. But it's like trying to escape from your own liver, or trying to run away from your own legs. It's like, just see what works. Just do it however you want to do it, but pay attention to like what's actually working and what's not, and then do what you want.
Yeah.
Do what you want.
That's great.
What else? What else?
Share the questions for reflection this week.
Okay. Why don't I do that?
Yeah.
Thank you, Gary. That was great. Thank you. So the exercise we put together just as a little reflection. And again, the 4th principle of proceeding in sacred space: no expectation of participation. This is just a suggestion. Do this exercise only if you want. Only if you want. No one's going to check. There's no quiz. And the way to do this would be just to find some quiet time, 5 or 10 minutes at home. If you've got kids running around at home, you can do this in the car, right? As you drive to get groceries, when you park in front of the grocery store, before you get out, you sit for an extra 5 or 10 minutes, get out some paper, think of these questions, and then just write, just barf it all out, right? It's just 5 or 10 minutes sitting in the car. No one's going to miss you, but only if you want. And so the question from this time would be, I think this. So the last time you had a big disruption in your life, a medical issue, a relationship issue with your partner or with a child or a parent or a sibling, a social issue with your friends, an issue at work, right? Some kind of social interaction, a financial issue, right? There's so many things, so many areas we can have issues with in our life. Okay. So the last time you had a big disruption in your life, how did you approach it? Did you approach it from a perspective and posture of curing? Let's just fix it, do whatever, just fix the damn thing and move on. Got my car keys, gonna just move on. Okay. Repair the defect, repair the flaw, fix the elbow. I don't want to talk about, we don't have time. In America, when you meet your doctor, you get a 20-minute slot. There's no time to talk about all that deeper stuff that doesn't show up on any medical records, right, or data. If we don't capture it in the empirical Hippocratic data, we don't care. We pretend it doesn't exist. Okay? Or Did you approach it from the posture of healing? Where you said, okay, what is the deeper pattern here? Right? I've got this toxic jerk at work who just will not leave me alone. What is the deeper pattern here? Well, the deeper pattern is actually every workplace I go to, the same thing happens. And unless there's some guild or club of these jerks where I'm, my name is on some list, I'm starting to think it's not just them. It can't be just the last dozen people who were jerks to me. There's got to be some pattern in me. Not that it's my fault, but what is the pattern that this is all consistent with? And then how do I change it potentially? So if you approached it through curing, which is like how 90% of us do it 90% of the time, myself included, okay? So if it was curing, your approach was curing, regardless of how it went, hopefully it went just fine. The exercise then is to reflect on this whole incident, this disruption, and replay it in your head, okay? Those of you who do healing with me, this is like when you have a dream and you did something and you're like, oh yeah, that was the wrong move. In waking time, you go back, you replay the dream, and you take the different choice and see where it takes you. You're literally going down a different path in the maze to see what happens. You can do that when you're awake. So the exercise here is not with your dream, but the last big disruption in your life. To reflect on it, replay it a bit in your head, and try to, in your mind, in your imagination, approach it from a healing posture instead. Another way of saying it actually is to read the entire episode like a dream and see what comes. And you know sort of how to do that now, even in live sacred space. We've done all these fairy tales, right? You know how I read dreams and fairy tales. And just see what insights come. Insights, not lessons. Oh, you better do this differently next time, right? You can do that, but that's more curing and allegorical. But to approach it more from a healing and symbolic perspective. What is the pattern? What are the insights that I might take from this? Okay, so that's it for the exercise. All right, so that's the end of our session. So I'll go ahead and close the session now. Our next session is same time next Sunday. I'll drop a link in Facebook and Crowdcast. It's free, open to the public. Please invite your friends, only if you want. And I look forward to seeing you all there. So I'll go ahead and close the session now by saying, I hereby close the session of our shared sacred space. Thank you for holding this space with me and us, and thank you for sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment, and the spiritual nourishment of the shared sacred space with us. I give you my blessing. Go in peace, bestowed with blessing, free of fear, free of threat, and free of the undue control of others. Have a great day, have a great week, and I will see you all in the next session. Happy Sunday, everyone. Thank you.